I want to welcome Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Policy, and Strategic Engagement at the Environmental Protection Agency, Rosemary Enobakhare. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Woo. Well, listen, thank you for taking the time to talk to me about these important issues. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. I want to start with representation, which we care a lot about at the 19th. I know it's very important to you. It's central to our mission. Your boss, Administrator Michael Regan, is the first Black person to lead the EPA. And you're a Black woman from the South that is leading strategy policy, and strategic engagement for the agency. So I want to talk about that. What does it mean to have somebody like you in this leadership role, seated at the table, making decisions?
Yeah. Well, let me just say, Administrator Regan is the first Black man because we did have Lisa Jackson.
Come on.
Who was the first Black woman who headed the administration at EPA. But I will also say that Michael Regan is the first HBCU graduate.
That part. All the representation.
Leading the EPA. He's a North Carolina A&T graduate. Are any Aggies in the room? I usually always have one Aggie pride.
Right, they're always going to represent.
Always represent. Although I went to Spelman, so Administrator Regan and I do have a tussle every now and then.
I'm sure, yes.
But representation is extremely important, but also perspective is important. Mm-hmm. Different lived experiences are really key to addressing environmental injustices across the country. And so that is really important for Administrator Regan. That's important for me. As a Black woman coming from Jackson, Mississippi, yes. I have that lived experience. I know many of you have probably heard about the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. And many people may think that that's something that just happened. No. It's something that has been happening for years.
Yeah, you lived some of that.
I did. I lived under bull water advisories and honestly thought it was something that was pretty normal. But
which it should never be normal.
It should never be normal.
Yeah.
And it's because of the work of folks like Monique Hardin and Dr. Beverly Wright, who are doing advocacy work to be able to educate and engage communities on how to take action, make their voices heard, be a part of the conversation. And so, that is really important to me. That's really important to the administrator. And so he's been working with folks like Deep South Center and others in order to be able to have communities' perspectives ring through the halls of EPA and the work that we're doing at all levels.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I want to hear more about that. I mean, daughter of Jackson, Spelmanite. Are there any Spelmanites in the house? I know that there are a couple, yes, okay. I want to hear more from you about how you are bringing that lived experience to your work.
Listen, HBCUs are really important for the administrator and for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so one of the things that we started is an HBCU advisory board. And so we are working to bring in voices from HBCU communities, from institutions and others in order to be able to advise the administrator on how to remove barriers of entry, right? A lot of HBCUs aren't really doing climate change work or sustainability work. They're starting to do more of that work thanks to the HBCU consortium that's run by Dr. Beverly Wright, the Deep South Center, as well as Dr. Bob Bullard from Texas Southern.
Father of Environmental Justice,
Yes. They are really working to integrate these schools into the climate justice movement, right? So that we're investing in our next generation of leaders.
Yeah.
Because young people are active and engaged and making their voices heard on why we need to take action on climate change, why we need to focus on solving a lot of these environmental injustices. And so we want to make sure that we're investing in them so they can come into places like EPA and be in leadership roles like EPA Administrator Regan and be in a role like mine as the Deputy Chief of Staff, which is a place I never thought I would be.
Yeah.
I was at EPA previously under the Obama administration, and I started out as a special assistant. And so to be able to move my way up to be Deputy Chief of Staff under the Biden administration, a time where environmental justice is being really leaned into and prioritized in such a real way, but not just in lip service, but also with resources.
Yeah.
And so I think that is really important at a time such as this. This is such a massive moment for the environmental justice movement. And so leaning into our future generations is really, really key and invaluable.
Yeah, well, I hear the sense of urgency that you have around not just using your platform to for the work that you are doing, but also to kind of help think about how you're preparing those coming behind you in that work.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to hear more about how you are thinking about that. We love celebrating Trailblazers at the 19th, just kind of the importance of making sure that you're not the last person to do the job that you're doing. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah. I mean, we can't be the last. We have to invest in our young people. And so, I go around, do events like this, right? We go to HBCUs across the country as well. Although a lot of them are centered here in the South.
Yeah.
We go and engage with those young people and those students. We've had a presence at the HBCU conference that happens usually, I think, Monique, help me out, it's usually when in the fall. Okay, next year. You're all invited. That's a shout out. But we work to really engage and be out and about and talk about the work that we're doing and the importance of it and why we need more young people to be a part of this work. We are building a bench. The administrator is building a bench to make sure that young people and people of color not only have a seat at the table, but it's also important to have a voice in the conversation.
Absolutely.
And so that is really a key component for the work that he's doing. Whenever the administrator sends me out, he's like, say something, be a part of the work, leave people with a message.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I often try to do is be a voice in the conversation and not just a seat at the table.
Well, I hear you talking about your youth engagement strategy. I wonder if specifically you can talk about the Environmental Youth Advisory Council that you all have and how the agency is working with them.
So as you all know, young people have been at the forefront of every major movement across this country. And so the environmental justice and the climate justice movement are no different. Young people are making their voices heard in a very real way. And so the administrator knew it would be a missed opportunity if we didn't have young people be a part of the conversation. So we started the NEAC, is what we call it.
Mm-hmm.
We started it, which is a group that advises the administrator on environmental policy. So they're talking about things from, power plants and how we make the transition to clean energy, to electric vehicles, right? As we make this transition from ICE engines to electric vehicles, right? Young people need to have a voice in the work that we're doing, and they have some thoughts. They have ideas, and we want to make sure that those things are incorporated in the work that we're doing. I'll say EPA traditionally has been an older agency.
Yeah.
And it also has traditionally been a white agency.
Sure, yeah.
Because for a while, that's what this issue was.
And that's what they thought cared about the environment, right? Or had anything to say about the environment. Well, talk to me about that then. What are you learning from these young people, from these diverse group of young folks, and how is it informing the strategy that you all are implementing?
It's informing it significantly, right? We are making sure that as we create regulations, right, from our power plant regulations to the work that we're doing on clean vehicles, that young people are participating. And so again, we have this advisory council. Its ages range from 16 all the way up to 29. And so we're trying to start early, right? Let's talk about environmental education. Let's talk about recycling. Let's talk about littering. Let's talk about plastics, right? Which is something that young people are really engaged and involved on and really, are passionate about. And so we're working to engage them, not just at EPA, but also at the White House, right? And giving them opportunities to shine and to make their voices and their opinions and their thoughts heard. And so many agencies are following our lead. EPA was the first agency to be able to create this advisory council.
Okay.
And so we're working with other agencies in order to be able to create these spaces for young people to be involved. And not in a transactional way, but in a very thoughtful, authentic way, where folks can really lean in and be a part of the conversation and talking to the highest levels of the agency. And that's really important for us and for them as well.
I want to also ask you kind of what that means for the workforce pipeline. I know you're working with the agency to diversify the workforce and to really bring people, more people into the environmental work at all levels. But what does that look like in practice?
So I'll tell you, EPA traditionally has not had a ton of money. EPA's operating budget has been $10 billion that is what it is, right? But because of President Biden's leadership, we've been able to bring in from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, $100 billion. Wow. That is 10 years worth of funding of the agency's operating budget.
That's game changing.
Yeah, it's game changing. And so we're doing a lot of hiring. And I'll tell you, one thing that the administrator did was he started the Office of Environmental Justice and Civil Rights. And so in that, EPA has $2 billion that we're utilizing for a grant called Community Change Grants, where we're able to leverage that funding in communities for nonprofits who have not had money generally for decades, right? We have $2 billion that will go to these nonprofit organizations who are community-based organizations to be able to utilize some of that funding to create real change, right? We are working with these folks in the community who have really solid, strong ideas on how to make change, right? We've gone to Cancer Alley and they tell us, look, you need to have air monitors in this place because that's where the wind goes. Right? We want to be able to give them the funding in order to be able to make those types of decisions, right? Yeah. Because they know they're in the community, they're on the ground. And so we want to be able to back it up with funding. And so President Biden was able to leverage, his resources and get this funding into the agency, and we're able to push it out into communities across the country. But not only that, right? We are working with these communities in order to be able to build infrastructure within their organizations. We have this thing called TIC-TACs, right? They're providing technical assistance to community groups in order for them to be thoughtful about how they put in grant applications, right? I looked at a grant application for the federal government and it is daunting, right? To say the least. But people like Deep South Center, they're working with these organizations in order to be able to prepare them to be able to take on a grant application so that they can be successful in being awarded this funding, right? So we've thought about this very thoughtfully in order to make sure that people are successful, right? We don't want to have this $2 billion in, I'm trying to think of a school, a predominantly white institution is applying for it and then giving the grant to a community group, right? We want the community group to be able to have access to that funding.
Direct access.
Directly, because we don't need somebody skimming money off the top. We want that money to go into community, right? And so that's really important for us.
Yeah, well, that's really important to hear about. Now, I hear the phrase Office of Environmental Justice, and I think, whoa, I bet there are some people that probably don't like the Office of Environmental Justice. And I mean, look, we've seen people, frankly, across the country lately who are politicizing the term DEI, right? You've got courts that are ruling against efforts to prioritize diversity and inclusion and to address systemic inequality. How is that impacting your approach?
Listen, EPA is focused on making regulations and policy that's long lasting. We want to make sure that the work that we're doing has longevity and is grounded in science, which is something that EPA, that's our mission. This is something that this administration really brought back, right? Is science and making sure that the work that we're doing is grounded in that science. And so that's the work that we do. And despite everything that's happening currently in the world with the Supreme Court and others, we will continue to do what we do, which is making sure that we're having regulation that protects public health.
Yeah, Black women know how to stay focused, right? Stay, despite what is going on around us. We are having this conversation in New Orleans, a predominantly Black community that has had its share of environmental disasters, and you've brought up Cancer Alley. Cancer Alley's been brought up in this room already. This is a region, that is home to Cancer Alley because of that concentration of industrial plants that cause very poor air quality. So, you started talking about what the EPA is doing to address historical wrongs and environmental injustices here and in other Southern communities that see these increased risks from climate change. What more can you say about the work that the EPA is doing around that?
Sure. Again, we're working on the ground with communities. We work with Deep South Center. We work with folks like Catherine Flowers, who's in Alabama, really leaning in on the solid waste issue. The administrator had this tour. It was called the Journey for Justice, where we went across the country. We started out in Jackson, Mississippi, my hometown. And the stark thing was we went to a school, and the school had porta potties lined up outside. We thought maybe it was a construction site. No. That's the bathroom that the students use because the school doesn't have adequate water pressure. So they have to use porta potties, right? We came down to Louisiana. Again, we went to Cancer Alley. We visited Mr. Robert Taylor, whose daughter is here in the room. We visited him and his family, and he took us to their family home and to their neighborhood. And we met with communities who, there was a family whose the grandmother had cancer, the son had cancer,
Yeah.
the child had cancer, the entire home had cancer, right? Or we were at a school where it was a stone throw away from an industrial facility, right? We then took it to Houston, where we saw issues around ports, right? You have all these trucks coming in, and folks are dealing with all these issues from air quality.
Yeah.
We went to Alaska, right, where you see some issues around tribal lands and others. But then we also went to Alabama, and I think Alabama stuck with me because we went to a home of a young lady. She had a trailer home, and we saw pipes protruding out, but we didn't think anything of it. But we went to that home and had a conversation with the homeowner, and she told us that's where her solid waste comes out. It comes out and it goes into her backyard, the place where her kids are playing,
Right.
where neighborhood kids are playing. Folks in that community are seeing things like hookworm, which is something we don't even really see in the United States. And so those are the type of environmental injustices that we're seeing, and that the administrator is engaging with these communities in order to be able to find solutions, right? Significant infrastructure challenges, from water infrastructure to solid waste infrastructure. It's aging, and we need to figure out solutions on how to be able to fix that.
Yeah.
And working with these communities is really, really, really important.
Yeah. Environmental justice as a dignity and quality of life issue. Absolutely. And also going to places, that are not necessarily, the most politically popular or valuable, in the minds of folks, but knowing that everybody is valuable regardless of whether they're in, some kind of battleground state or something.
Absolutely. That's right. That's right. And, the South isn't traditionally a place that people go, right? And the administrator made sure that he left from behind his desk in Washington, D.C. and said, I am going to go to these communities. Yeah. And when we went there, people were just happy that he came.
Yes.
Right. And so his thought is, I want to bring national attention to these issues because people don't know that it's happening. And we need to make sure that folks across the world know that this is happening, because we need resources in these communities in order to be able to provide solutions.
Yeah. Well, you brought up resources. You brought up the $100 billion. Let's talk about money. So the EPA did get that historic investment via the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. That was a couple of years ago. So a couple of years in, how is that being invested? What does that look like?
Yeah. Again, we talked about community change grants, which is $2 billion. It's on a rolling basis. So if folks don't know, you should apply. You should go on the website and apply for this funding. We have $5 billion for electric school buses. So transitioning from those old dirty buses where, the kids and the teachers are out there breathing in all those fumes, to transitioning to electric buses. So $5 billion for that. We also have funding for lead pipe removal. It's funny, we talk about lead pipe. Yeah, $50 billion. We talk about lead pipes and people are like, oh, that's a Flint issue. No, it's the issue that's happening across the country.
Yeah, it's an American issue.
Right? People think that, it is far away from their homes, but it's not. It's in communities that you don't even think of, right? I've had conversations with folks. They're like, oh, that's not really an issue that we deal with. Actually, it is. And so I'm glad that the room knew that was a significant problem, because it's definitely an issue that many communities are facing. Yeah. We have $27 billion around the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is focused on, mitigating climate issues. So there's a large array of funding that we're working to put out, and we're working hard to get it out very quickly. Yeah. And so, I think we're trying to work with community groups across the country in order to make sure that people know, so that folks are applying for this funding as quickly as possible. Yeah. Because it's really important for us to be able to use this money in communities in a very thoughtful way as we transition to clean energy in a very just way.
Yeah. Well, you've already kind of name-checked a few of the grassroots groups that are historically led by Black women, as we know. What is the agency doing to really invest in those types of groups?
I mean, I can tell you, I call Dr. Wright and Monique Hardin probably weekly because it's important to have their perspective. They've been at this fight for such a long time. And it's important for, as we make decisions and as we are thinking about ways to address things in a very thoughtful way, that we have their perspective. Folks like Catherine Flowers, again, I feel like, I stand on these people's shoulders, and they're the reason why I do the work that I do. And when I first started at the EPA, again, I started in 2013 under the Obama administration, and I left during a certain period, and I came back under the Biden administration.
A certain period. Yes.
So, for me, the reason why I stayed in this work, because again, I told you I started as a special assistant at the agency. The reason why I stayed in this work was because I saw people in the room making decisions for my communities who didn't look like me.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was really important for me to stay in the fight and to stay in this work because it was important for me to be able to have a voice again in the conversation. And so, I have really enjoyed this work, and I want to make sure that I'm bringing people along with me. And so I am really passionate about it. And the administrator is too, really, again, investing in our young people and making sure that we're building a bench of young people to come behind us to really do this work.
Yeah. And it feels like it really is important for you to be in relationship with
Yes.
so many of these trailblazers and so many of these women that have been in the work for such a long time who do look like you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we do have to talk about the Supreme Court. You brought it up. I was like, yeah, we're going to get to that. They've been very busy this season. In particular, they're ruling on the Raimondo case. This ruling basically overturned 40 years of legal precedents known as Chevron Deference. I'm sure I don't have to tell this audience, but I'm going to try to explain as a wannabe lawyer, okay? So basically, Chevron Deference meant that when there's a legal dispute involving ambiguous laws, judges should defer to federal agencies when the rules that they make are reasonable. This famously came from a 1984 case between Chevron and the EPA. Notice I said 1984. So now with this new ruling, that precedent gone, Supreme Court said courts get to decide what laws mean when there is ambiguity. So I'm curious, what is this going to mean for agencies like the EPA and how they are able to enact change?
Yeah. Again, we're still doing the work, right? We are creating policies that are sound, that are based in science, and that address public health. And so we are going to continue to move forward. Obviously, we were disappointed with the ruling, but we are working closely and in tandem with the White House as we continue to see what this means for the agency and our work broadly.
Yeah, but I think that does kind of help frame the stakes for people, especially people for whom climate justice is an issue, that it is political, that it is on the ballot for folks in 2024. I mean, look, we're just 4 months away from a presidential election. What do you think, what do you hope a second Biden administration would look like in terms of environmental policy? Is there unfinished work that you want to see through? I mean, I hear the urgency in your voice about what you want to get done, even, the rest of this year. What is the unfinished work that you would hope to be able to accomplish?
Sure. I mean, environmental justice and civil rights work has been prioritized in this administration like no other. And so continuing to see that through is really my focal point and something that I feel like is unfinished business. Yeah. Continuing to invest in these groups is really important and something that we need to continue to prioritize. But also, again, leaning in and building a strong environmental workforce at the EPA of people that look like me is also really important and pivotal as well. And so we'll continue to do that work now and in the future.
Yeah. Well, get in the work, stay in the fight. I hear you saying that to this audience, to the people that are tuning in. So before I let you go, I know that our audience here, they've been talking about solutions, looking for solutions and ways to get involved, either in their own community or nationally. So what advice do you have for them?
Yeah. So many groups are working on this issue. Again, I talked about Deep South Center. They're based here in Louisiana, but there are many others like them. NAACP is another one who's really doing a lot of really thoughtful and strategic work around this issue. Get involved, right? EPA has regional offices. And so go to EPA.gov, see if there's a regional office in your area, join that work. But also, create your own entity, right? A lot of young people are like, I want to start my own organization. Create your own and do the work that you see that's missing. Spelman taught me, be the change that you want to see. And so if that is something that you want to do the work, create your own, start an organization, and EPA is there to help you. Again, we have this funding to be able to help you do this work. So that's what I would leave folks with.
Absolutely. We are the solutions. The solutions are right here in this room. Rosemary, thank you so much for this fantastic conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks.